Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sasha Farbach. With 124 billion euros in goods trade and nearly 60 billion in services last year, the EU and India are already deeply intertwined economically, together representing a market of 2 billion people and nearly a quarter of global GDP. As relations with Washington strain under renewed U.S. tariff threats and Europe reassesses its reliance on China, Brussels is now pushing to finalize a free trade agreement with New Delhi, nearly 20 years in the making. The deal, however, raises questions about leverage and whether this partnership is strategic alignment or mutual hedging. Now, to discuss it all further, we're joined by Krzysztof Iwanek, adjunct professor, Faculty of International Studies, University of Białystok. Good to have you with us here. Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
So these next few days, we have higher profile leaders of the European Union Commission arriving in India and already there. Tell us about your sense of timing in all this. Is it chance that this is happening right now? And what kind of pressures from China and the United States have made this an even more important meeting?
Well, it certainly seems that the deal is underway now, even though the parties had been negotiating such a deal way back in the past and haven't achieved it at that time. So it is possible that the current circumstances have influenced, the final fructification of this deal. The American tariffs have apparently hit the heightening, the raising of American tariffs have apparently hit India very badly. And India is also looking to decouple itself from China to lessen its dependence on imports from China. Although I would stress that in many areas where this deal seems to be negotiated, the type of tariffs that will be lessened are not necessarily on the type of goods that are traded between India and the EU that would be otherwise traded between the India and US or India and China. So it's partially affected by relations with the US and China, and partially it's a separate issue, I believe.
Mm-hmm. And it's also, I want to get into it a bit further. I mean, if we look at the market itself, I mean, these are big numbers if we're looking at 25% combined of GDP. But on the tariffs as well, if we're looking now, the average EU tariffs right now on Indian goods is around 3.8%. So, I mean, with this kind of trade deal, would they realistically really make a huge difference here? And secondly, my point is also about there are already protective areas, right, of access. So if we're looking at market access, things like steel, dairy, those are protected. So how much, let's say, are expectations here versus reality?
Well, that's a good question. I guess the real response should be provided, sector-wise, sector by sector, for which I believe we don't have time. But in a nutshell, let's stress that both parties, right, both the EU and India are very protective of their markets. What is called here a free trade deal, as you rightly mentioned, would be a decrease in certain tariffs, and not, like a revolutionary change in their bilateral trade. But it is expected, nonetheless, that India would decrease, tariffs on imports of products like alcohol and vehicles. And although that wouldn't be a sea change, manufacturers, for example, from Germany would possibly benefit. Yeah, I cannot tell you like the percentage of it, but they would probably export to some degree more vehicles to India if such tariffs would be reduced. But indeed, apart from what you have mentioned, another important aspect is that the Indian market has a lot of, let's put it honestly, poor customers. So there would be a part of the middle class that would buy more, let's say, German or French cars, but that wouldn't revolutionize EU exports of vehicles to India.
And also, one of the elephants in the room, I think, will be Russia. I mean, this is a country, well, India has been playing a little bit of both sides, still very much connected also in terms of, well, now a little bit more impacted by, let's say, the limits of what's going to be imported. But nevertheless, the military relationship is still there. How much is this weighing in on these negotiations? Will the EU be successful in pulling India closer to Europe's orbit, or is this just a strategic, let's say, play for now?
Well, I'm honestly doubtful if the trade negotiations as such have affected India's stance on Russia. We have been receiving, kind of conflicted reports about whether India is decreasing the volume of its imports of Russian petroleum crude or not. It seems that they have been decreased between November till January, and they may be raised again in February. So I think the EU, in a way, kept those trade negotiations separate from the issue of Russia. So kind of I think here the EU has kind of swallowed a bitter pill and said to itself, okay, yeah, we need to deal with the Russian threat, but we also need a free trade agreement with India, and apparently one wasn't conditioned on the other. But let me also stress that I think the EU has been otherwise, working on the Russia issue in the sense that, there have been sanctions, there have been ways to pressurize, Indian companies to purchase less Russian petroleum crude. These may be successful, but apparently these are policies of the EU that are being implemented regardless of the free trade agreement with India.
And also, I mean, I want to mention, because you said this has been some time in the making. It still needs probably more time for this to get across the line. I want to mention Mercosur briefly, because this is also one of those major deals that was touted by the Commission as something very, very positive for the EU. Yeah, that is a little bit stuck now. European Parliament, legal issues. So having that does that cast a shadow over this? Does Mercosur now also show that this is not so easy to get across the line?
Well, possibly. The free trade agreement between the EU and India hasn't been signed yet. So once it will be signed, we, the public, should learn more details. And once we do, there may be a certain form of pushback. I would imagine, for instance, that since the tariffs are expected to be lowered also on agricultural products, there may be pushback. There will certainly be pushback from Indian farmers who seek the state's protection within India, and there may be similar pushback here. Although I would say that in this regard, I don't think the EU farmers should be afraid, because the Indian farmers are usually are small-scale farmers that some of their products are purchased from the state on preset prices, so they are not used to be competitive. But one thing is how the economic reality looks like, and the other thing is how the EU farmers will take this, right? There is also, for example, the issue of the Indian steel being, cheaper than, for instance, Polish steel. So again, if tariffs or a form of tariffs, which is a CBAM mechanism, would be lowered here, allowing the EU to buy the Indian steel cheaper, then again, there would be, I assume, pushback from, among others, the Polish companies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because, I mean, as we said, the dust hasn't even settled yet from the Mercosur deal. So the Indian market is even bigger. So, I mean, where do you foresee, let's say, also some of the challenges? I mean, you mentioned some of the farmers who may also be against this, but where do you see, let's say, the largest opportunities, in particular, if you can tell us where those benefits would come from, for instance, for Poland, if we're looking at India?
Well, as I mentioned, I think one large opportunity is for car manufacturers like Germany to export more to India. That would, in a degree, also benefit Poland in the sense that, a part of our manufacturing is, connected to German car manufacturing. Otherwise, there would be opportunities, I believe, in, electrical machinery and in food processing. So India is a very large agricultural market. India, however, is not, very developed when it comes to food processing. So I would hope at least that, opening the exports of processed food to India would be an opportunity for some Polish companies.
And there's also, looking at a little bit more just before we close here, I want to get your sense of how, let's say, asymmetrical this deal might be. I mean, there's also focus on, if we're looking, we mentioned certain sectors like steel and agriculture, but also if we're looking at services, if we're looking at IP, looking at what India wants. So where do you see those challenges moving ahead? Because I think there's many, many areas to this where people will wonder, where are the stumbling blocks here?
So there would be certainly an imbalanced agreement in the sense that what one side, can offer is what the other side doesn't have. So, in a very short form, what the EU offers to a degree are advanced technologies. What India may offer are, cheap services, cheap goods, and people. So that's not like one-to-one. These are completely different things. So we expect this FTA to come together with a mobility agreement, but that would mostly, I believe, be mobility one way. We would have more Indian specialists, we would have more Indian students. There wouldn't be much more Europeans going the other way, I believe. The stumbling block here, I believe, is, a certain form of resistance EU generally into accepting more immigration. But I think the EU needs this, especially when it comes to skilled professionals, and India does have many. And then another stumbling block are those requirements of the EU that I have briefly mentioned, so within the CBM mechanism. So kind of a way to penalize a developing country for generating pollution. So that appears to be the largest stumbling block so far. So India is penalized, for instance, by having to pay more for exporting goods like coal or steel to EU. India wants to pay less, doesn't want to pay the CBM mechanism. I'm not sure what will be announced within several days from now, but I think the EU is adamant that India is still expected to pay more for such goods. So that appears to be the largest stumbling block as of now.
All right, and we've seen that with EU trade deals, these are not simple affairs, and we'll see what they'll have concluded in the next few days. I'm sure we'll discuss it more. Thanks so much for setting there the terrain for us to understand further. That was Professor Krzysztof Iwanek. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, sir.
And thank you for watching World Talks, but stay right here on TVP World for more news and commentary. Goodbye.